1 split second. That's all it takes to trade a life of invisibility for a life in the crosshairs. Cassidy Rourke was a nobody, a waitress scraping gum off tables and counting dimes to pay rent. She didn't know the trembling boy in the corner booth was the heir to the East Coast's most violent crime syndicate. She didn't know the bullet meant for him would tear through her instead. And she certainly didn't know that by saving the son, she had just indebted herself to the devil. This isn't a fairy tale about a prince saving a pauper. This is the story of how a waitress walked into a war zone, took a bullet for the Vanzetti bloodline, and woke up owned by the Mafia boss. This is the waitress's debt. The neon sign of Jerry's 24-hour diner flickered with a rhythmic dying buzz that matched the pounding headache behind Cassidy Rourke's left eye. It was 3:17 a.m. in the outskirts of Philadelphia. The kind of hour where the city stopped pretending to be civilized, and the creatures of the night crawled in for greasy eggs and black coffee. Cassidy wiped the counter with a rag that smelled of bleach and old onions. She was 23, but in this light, with dark circles etched under her eyes and a uniform 2 sizes too big, hanging off her slender frame, she felt 40. "Hey, sweetheart, more coffee." The demand came from a trucker in booth 4 who had been eyeing her like a piece of meat since midnight. Cassidy didn't flinch. She grabbed the pot, her movements automatic. "Coming right up," she said, her voice raspy. She poured the sludge into his mug, ignoring his hand brushing against hers, and walked away. She had $68 in tips in her apron. Her rent was 3 days late. Her landlord, Mr. Henderson, was threatening eviction, and her car had a transmission that sounded like a blender full of gravel. She didn't have time for fear or romance. She only had time for survival. The bell above the door chimed. Cassidy didn't look up immediately. "Sit anywhere. Kitchen closes in 20 minutes. Just a water, please." The voice was small, too small for Jerry's at 3 a.m. Cassidy turned. Sitting in the booth furthest from the window, partially obscured by the shadows of a flickering streetlight, was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old. He was wearing a hoodie that looked expensive, thick cashmere, not the cheap polyester blends usually seen in this neighborhood, but it was pulled low over his face. She walked over, pad in hand. "Kid, does your mom know you're out here?" The boy looked up. He had piercing green eyes, terrified, and darting toward the window every 3 seconds. "I'm waiting for my uncle. He said to wait here." Cassidy frowned. Her instincts, honed by growing up in a foster system that chewed kids up and spat them out, flared. Something was wrong. The kid was trembling. "You want a grilled cheese?" she asked, her voice softening. "On the house?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. "Please." Cassidy turned to the kitchen window, yelling the order to Stan the cook, who was currently asleep, standing up. As she waited, she watched the boy. He was clutching a backpack to his chest, like it contained gold bars. He wasn't street tough. He was terrified. She brought the water and the sandwich over. "What's your name?" "Leo," he whispered. "I'm Cass. Eat up, Leo. It's tough to wait on an empty stomach." She moved back to the counter to tally her receipts, but she kept one eye on him. The diner was quiet. The trucker had left, leaving a meager $2 tip. The silence stretched heavy and oppressive. Then the headlights swept across the diner. It wasn't a police car. It wasn't a taxi. It was a black Lincoln Navigator with tinted windows rolling slowly into the parking lot, like a shark entering a reef. It didn't park in a spot. It idled right in front of the glass entrance. Cassidy saw Leo stiffen. The boy stopped chewing. He slid down in the booth, making himself small. "Is that your uncle?" Cassidy asked, stepping around the counter. Leo shook his head violently. "No. No, hide me. Please." The fear in his voice wasn't childish anxiety. It was mortal terror. Cassidy didn't ask questions. She didn't have time. "Under the table," she hissed, moving toward him. "Now!" Leo scrambled under the Formica table. Cassidy grabbed a bus tub and started clearing the table next to him, trying to look casual, trying to block the line of sight from the window. The door to the diner didn't open. Instead, the window of the navigator rolled down. Cassidy saw the barrel before she heard the sound. It was matte black, long, and leveled directly at the booth where Leo had been sitting seconds ago. Suppressor. Her mind registered a useless fact from an ex-boyfriend who loved action movies. Time warped. It slowed down to a syrupy crawl. She saw the flash. She saw the glass of the diner window, spiderweb, before it exploded inward. She didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds. She simply moved. Cassidy threw herself to the left, diving over the booth seat, covering the space where Leo was huddled on the floor. Thwip, thwip. Two sounds, like a staple gun. Then an agonizing, burning heat tore through her right shoulder, spinning her around. She hit the floor hard, her head cracking against the linoleum. "Stay down!" she screamed at the boy, her voice sounding bubbly and distant. More glass shattered. The navigator's tires screeched, peeling out of the lot. Silence returned to Jerry's, but now it was punctuated by the dripping of rain coming through the broken window and the harsh, ragged sound of Cassidy's breathing. Miss, Leo was crying, crawling out from under the table. His expensive hoodie was stained with grease from the floor. And blood. Her blood. Cassidy looked down. Her white uniform was blossoming with a dark crimson rose at the shoulder. The pain hit her then, a sledgehammer of nausea. "Stan!" She tried to yell, but it came out as a whimper. The cook burst out of the kitchen phone in hand, eyes wide. "Jesus Christ, Cass! I'm calling 911. "The kid," Cass gasped, her vision tunneling. The edges of the world were turning grey. She reached out with her good hand and grabbed Leo's wrist. Don't go out there." "I'm sorry," Leo sobbed, holding her hand with both of his small ones. "I'm so sorry." The last thing Cassidy Rourke saw before the darkness swallowed her was the flashing red and blue lights reflecting in the shattered glass and a pair of polished black Italian leather shoes stepping through the debris, ignoring the police walking straight toward her with the authority of a god. The beeping was annoying. It was a rhythmic, high-pitched chirp that drilled directly into her brain. Cassidy tried to lift her arm to swat the noise away, but her body refused to obey. Her right side felt like it was encased in concrete, heavy and throbbing with a dull, aching fire. "She's waking up." A deep voice. Baritone. Cold. "Vitals are stabilizing Mr. Vanzetti, but she lost a lot of blood." A doctor's voice. Nervous. Cassidy forced her eyes open. The light was dim, soft, and amber, not the harsh fluorescent glare of a county hospital. She blinked, trying to clear the fog. She wasn't in a curtained-off ER bay. She was in a private room that looked more like a hotel suite. Mahogany panels, silk curtains, a flat-screen TV on the wall. And standing at the foot of her bed was a man who sucked all the air out of the room. He was tall, over 6'2", wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that probably cost more than everything Cassidy had ever owned combined. His hair was dark, swept back, and his jawline was sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that froze her steel grey, calculating and utterly void of warmth. He looked like a predator, deciding whether to eat or play with its food. "Where?" Cassidy's voice was a dry croak. She coughed, and the pain in her shoulder spiked. The man stepped closer. He poured a glass of water from a crystal pitcher and held the straw to her lips. His hands were large, manicured, but scarred at the knuckles. "Drink," he commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. Cassidy drank. The water was cool and soothing. She pulled back, gasping. "Where am I? Where is Leo?" The man placed the glass down. "Leo is safe. He is in the next room, refusing to sleep until he knows you aren't dead." He pulled a chair over and sat down. The movement was fluid, predatory. "I am Dominic Vanzetti." The name landed in the room like a grenade. Even Cassidy, who kept her head down and tried to ignore the news, knew the name Vanzetti. They owned the unions. They owned the docks. They owned the politicians. "You're the Mafia," she whispered, the drugs in her system loosening her filter. Dominic didn't flinch. He didn't smile. "I am a businessman, Miss Rourke, and you are the woman who threw herself in front of a .45 caliber round meant for my son." Cassidy stared at him. The memory rushed back. The navigator. The glass. The fear in Leo's eyes. "He's just a kid," she murmured. "He was scared." "He was foolish," Dominic corrected sharply. "He ran away. He thought he could survive the city alone. He learned a harsh lesson." Dominic leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face inches from hers. "But that is a family matter. We are here to discuss you." "I don't want anything," Cassidy said, instinct kicking in. I did what anyone would do." "No," Dominic said softly. "Most people would have ducked. Most people would have let the boy die to save their own skin. You did not." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a file. He tossed it onto the bedspread near her legs. "Cassidy Rourke, age 23. Foster care from age 6 to 18. No living relatives. Currently employed at Jerry's Diner. 3 months behind on rent at the crumbling apartment complex on 4th Street. $7,000 in debt due to medical bills from a bout of pneumonia last winter." Cassidy felt exposed, violated. "You looked me up. I know everything about you, Cassidy. I know you have nothing. I know you are invisible to this world. Is there a point to this?" She snapped, anger cutting through the fear. "Or did you just come here to insult the person who saved your kid?" For the first time, a flicker of something passed through Dominic's eyes. Respect, or maybe just amusement. "The point," Dominic said, standing up and buttoning his jacket, "is that the Vanzetti family pays its debts. Always. I don't want your money. I don't want your blood money," Cassidy said, trying to sit up, but failing. "It is not an offer, Miss Rourke." Dominic walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the brass handle. "The people who shot at my son, they missed. They will be looking for loose ends. They will be looking for the witness who saw the shooter's face." Cassidy's blood ran cold. "I didn't see anyone." "They don't know that," Dominic said. He turned to look at her one last time. "You cannot go back to your apartment. You cannot go back to the diner. Your old life did the moment you tackled Leo. Until I find who ordered the hit, you are under my protection. And if I refuse," Dominic's expression was grim, "then you will be dead by sunrise. Get some rest, Cassidy. We leave in the morning." He walked out, leaving her alone in the silence of the luxury room, trapped between a bullet wound and the most dangerous man in the city. The ride to the Vanzetti estate was silent, suffocating, and terrifyingly efficient. Cassidy sat in the back of the armored SUV, her arm in a sling, staring out the tinted window as the grimy streets of Philadelphia gave way to the rolling, manicured hills of the wealthy suburbs. She wasn't alone. Beside her sat a man named Silas Dominic, second in command. He was older, perhaps 50, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and eyes that watched her with open suspicion. He hadn't said a word since they left the private clinic, but his hand never strayed far from the inside of his jacket. "You don't have to look at me like I'm going to steal the upholstery," Cassidy muttered, wincing as the car went over a speed bump. "I'm the one who got shot, remember?" Silas turned his head slowly. "People who get close to Mr. Vanzetti usually want something. Money, power, favor. I'm just waiting to see which one you are." "I want to go back to my apartment and feed my cat," Cassidy shot back. It was a lie she didn't have a cat, but she wasn't about to tell this stone-faced gangster that she had absolutely nothing to go back to. The car slowed. They approached a massive wrought-iron gate flanked by stone pillars. Cameras buzzed and rotated as the vehicle approached. The gate swung open, revealing a winding driveway lined with ancient oaks that led up to a house, no a fortress. It was a sprawling limestone mansion that looked like something out of a history book or a twisted fairy tale. It was beautiful, but cold. As the SUV pulled up to the circular drive, Cassidy saw armed men patrolling the perimeter. They wore suits, but the bulges under their arms were unmistakable. "Welcome to purgatory," Cassidy whispered to herself. Dominic was waiting for them at the top of the stone steps. He had changed out of the suit from the hospital into a black turtleneck and dark trousers, looking less like a CEO and more like a tactician preparing for war. Silas opened the door, and Cassidy stepped out the cool autumn air, biting at her exposed skin. She was still wearing the sweatpants and t-shirt the nurse had given her. She felt small, underdressed, and incredibly vulnerable. "How is the shoulder?" Dominic asked, skipping pleasantries. "It throbs," Cassidy replied, clutching her sling. "Is this really necessary? I can just leave town. I can disappear on my own." Dominic walked down one step, invading her personal space. "The men who shot at my son are from the Moretti family. They are not sloppy. If you go back to your life, they will find you within 24 hours to see if you can identify the shooter. If you leave town, they will track your credit cards. You are safe only where I say you are safe." He gestured to the massive double doors. "Inside." The interior was intimidatingly grand. Marble floors reflected the light of a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than Jerry's diner made in a decade. A severe-looking woman in a housekeeper's uniform waited in the foyer. "This is Martha," Dominic said. "She will show you to your room. You will find clothes there. Dinner is at 8. Do not be late." "I'm not your guest," Cassidy argued, her temper flaring despite the pain. "And I'm not your prisoner. I have a job. I have a life." Dominic stopped halfway up the grand staircase and turned. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You had a job," he corrected calmly. "I bought the diner this morning." Cassidy's mouth fell open. "You what?" "It was a failing investment, but the location has strategic value for my logistics operations. I closed it an hour ago. The staff have been given generous severance packages. You, however, have been transferred." "Transferred to what?" Cassidy demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "To the position of staying alive," Dominic said, his eyes hard. "Go with Martha." He turned and walked away, disappearing into a corridor on the second floor. Cassidy stood there fuming, feeling the trap snap shut. He hadn't just saved her. He had erased her old life completely. Martha led her to a suite on the 3rd floor. It was luxurious, with a 4-poster bed, a balcony overlooking the grounds, and a bathroom filled with expensive soaps. But Cassidy noticed the details: the heavy lock on the door, the sheer drop from the balcony, the fact that her window faced the interior courtyard where guards were posted. On the bed were several boxes. Cassidy opened one. It contained silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, tailored trousers. No waitress uniforms, no cheap denim. She felt a knock on the door. It wasn't Martha. It was Leo. The boy looked better than he had in the diner, cleaned up and wearing fresh clothes, but his eyes were still haunted. He held a small, slightly crushed flower in his hand. "Hi," he whispered. Cassidy's anger deflated instantly. She sat on the edge of the bed and patted the spot next to her. "Hey, kid, you okay?" Leo nodded and walked over, placing the flower on her lap. "I picked this from the garden. The gardeners yelled at me, but I wanted to say thank you for saving me." Cassidy smiled, picking up the flower. "It's beautiful, Leo. Thank you." "My dad is scary," Leo said, suddenly looking at the door. "But he keeps promises. He said you're part of the family now because you bled for us." "Part of the family?" Cassidy repeated the words, tasting like ash. "Is that what this is?" "He doesn't let people leave," Leo said matter-of-factly. "Mum tried to leave once." Cassidy froze. "Where is your mum now, Leo?" Leo looked down at his sneakers. "She lives in the ground in the family plot." A chill went down Cassidy's spine that had nothing to do with her injury. She realized then that Dominic Vanzetti wasn't just a rich criminal. He was a man who viewed people as possessions, and she was his newest acquisition. That evening dinner was a silent, tense affair. The dining room table was long enough to seat 20, but it was just Dominic at the head, Leo to his left, and Cassidy to his right. Cassidy picked at her roasted duck, her appetite gone. She watched Dominic. He ate with precision, cutting his meat into perfect squares. "Who are the Morettis?" she asked, breaking the silence. Silas, standing in the corner of the room, stiffened. Dominic didn't look up. "A rival faction. They control the gambling in Atlantic City. They have been trying to encroach on Philadelphia for months." "And they shoot kids?" Cassidy asked, her voice rising. "They shoot leverage," Dominic said coldly. "Leo is my only heir. If they kill him, the Vanzetti line ends with me. It creates weakness." "He's a child, not a chess piece," Cassidy snapped. Dominic dropped his fork. The clatter echoed in the large room. He turned his head slowly to face her. "Do not presume to tell me how to value my son, Miss Rourke. You saved him, yes, but do not mistake gratitude for equality. In this house you listen." "Or what?" Cassidy challenged, leaning forward, adrenaline masking her pain. "You'll put me in the ground like Leo's mom." The air left the room. Leo gasped. Silas took a step forward, his hand going to his holster. Dominic's face went blank, a terrible empty blankness that was far scarier than anger. He stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. "My wife," Dominic said, his voice quiet and deadly, "died of leukemia 3 years ago. I spent millions trying to save her. I sat by her bed every night for 6 months until she took her last breath." He stood up, towering over the table. "Silas, escort Miss Rourke to her room. She is tired and clearly delirious." Cassidy felt the blood drain from her face. She had misstepped, badly. As Silas gripped her good arm and hauled her up, she looked back at Dominic. He wasn't looking at her. He was pouring himself a glass of wine, his hand perfectly steady, but his jaw was clenched so tight she thought a tooth might crack. She was dragged back to the golden cage, the lock clicking shut behind her. She rushed to the balcony, looking out at the dark grounds. She needed to escape. She needed to get out. But as she looked down, she saw the red laser dot of a sniper's scope dance across the stone railing just inches from her hand. A warning. She stepped back into the room, heart hammering. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't just a witness. She was a prisoner of war in a house built on blood. 3 days passed. 3 days of silence, luxury, and isolation. Cassidy's shoulder was healing. The doctor who visited daily, a nervous man named Dr. Aris, said she was lucky. The bullet had passed through the deltoid muscle without hitting the bone or artery. But Cassidy didn't feel lucky. She felt like a bird battering its wings against glass. She hadn't seen Dominic since the dinner. She saw Leo occasionally sneaking into her room to play cards, or just sit in silence. But he was always retrieved quickly by Martha or Silas. Boredom was becoming as dangerous as the Morettis. Cassidy Rourke was a worker. She had been working since she was 14. Idleness made her anxious. It gave her too much time to think about the sniper in the garden and the coldness in Dominic's eyes. On the 4th morning, she snapped. She dressed in a pair of the black tailored trousers and a silk blouse she found in the closet, tied her hair back, and marched downstairs. She ignored Martha's protests in the hallway. She ignored the guard by the library door. She pushed the heavy oak doors open. Dominic was sitting behind a massive desk surrounded by screens and stacks of paper. He was on the phone, speaking rapid-fire Italian. He stopped mid-sentence when she burst in. He said a few more words into the receiver and hung up. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I need a job," Cassidy announced. Dominic blinked. "Excuse me. I said I need a job. I'm going crazy in that room. I'm not a princess and I'm not an invalid. I can't just sit around eating your fancy food and waiting to get shot again." Dominic leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "You are recovering. I'm recovering, not dead. I can answer phones. I can file papers. I can cook. I don't care. But if you keep me locked in that room, I'm going to start breaking your expensive vases just to hear a sound different from the air conditioning." A ghost of a smile touched Dominic's lips. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less like a monument to death. "You are persistent." "I'm bored," she corrected. Dominic stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped in front of her. He smelled of sandalwood and expensive tobacco. "Very well. You want to be useful. We are hosting a gala on Saturday night, here at the estate. It is a charity event for the city's hospitals, a front, obviously, for the families to meet, without police scrutiny." "Okay," Cassidy said, wary. "What do I do?" "You will be my eyes," Dominic said. "Silas and my men are security. They look for weapons. I need someone to look for deceit." "I'm a waitress, Dominic, not a spy." "Waitresses are the best spies," Dominic countered. "You read people for tips. You know who is cheap, who is angry, who is lying to their wife on the phone. You saw the shooter in the diner before anyone else did, because you were paying attention." He stepped closer, his voice dropping an octave. "At the gala, I need you to mingle. Listen to the gossip. Specifically, I need you to listen to a man named Councilman Thorne. I believe he is the one who sold Leo's location to the Morettis. A politician. Everyone has a price, Cassidy. I need to know his. Cassidy felt a thrill of adrenaline. It was dangerous, yes, but it was better than being a prisoner. It was agency. If I do this, Cassidy said, meeting his gaze, I want my phone back, and I want to be able to walk the grounds without a laser dot on my chest. Dominic studied her face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out her cracked smartphone. Done. But do not leave the perimeter, for your own sake. He handed her the phone. Their fingers brushed. A spark of electricity, sharp and undeniable, jumped between them. Cassidy pulled her hand back quickly. Dominic didn't move, his grey eyes locked on hers, intense and searching. Get out, he said softly, before I change my mind. Cassidy fled the office, her heart racing. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. The estate transformed. Tents were erected on the lawn. Caterers buzzed through the kitchen. Cassidy found herself in a strange position, half staff, half confidant. She spent time in the kitchen, helping the chefs chop vegetables, despite her bad arm earning their grudging respect. She spent time with Leo, who was ecstatic that she was allowed out of her room. But she also noticed the tension. The guards were doubling their shifts. Silas was constantly whispering to Dominic. The threat of the Morettis hung over the house like a storm cloud. Saturday night arrived. Cassidy wore a dress Dominic had provided, a floor-length emerald green gown that hugged her curves and hid the bandage on her shoulder. It was backless, elegant, and terrified her. She looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked like a Mafia queen. She went downstairs. The ballroom was filled with Philadelphia's elite judges, doctors, union leaders, and men with scars hidden under tuxedos. Dominic found her near the champagne fountain. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He paused when he saw her, his eyes sweeping over her form with a heat that made her knees weak. You clean up well, Miss Rourke, he murmured, handing her a glass of sparkling water. You don't look so bad yourself, boss, she retorted, trying to keep her defenses up. Councilman Thorne is by the orchestra, the fat man with the red tie. Go. Cassidy nodded and slipped into the crowd. She played the part perfectly. She smiled. She laughed at bad jokes. She pretended to be a distant cousin of the Vanzettis. She found Councilman Thorne. He was sweating, drinking heavily, and talking to a thin man with a hooked nose. Cassidy moved closer, pretending to admire a flower arrangement. Payment is late, the thin man was whispering. I can't rush it, Thorne hissed back. Vanzetti is suspicious. The hit on the boy failed. He's turning over every stone. The Morettis want results, Thorne. You gave them the boy's schedule. They missed. Now they want the father. Tonight. Cassidy's blood froze. Tonight. I disabled the sensors in the East Wing, Thorne whispered, at 10:00 p.m. Tell them to come through the library terrace. Cassidy checked her watch. It was 9:55 p.m. She didn't think. She turned and scanned the room for Dominic. He was on the other side of the ballroom, surrounded by people. She couldn't get to him in time without causing a scene. She looked at the library doors, the East Wing. That was where Leo's room was. Panic exploded in her chest. They weren't just coming for Dominic. They were going to finish the job on Leo. Cassidy hiked up her expensive gown and ran. She ignored the stares, ignored the confused murmurs. She sprinted out of the ballroom, down the hallway, kicking off her heels. Cassidy! She heard Silas yell behind her. She burst into the library. The terrace doors were unlocked slightly ajar. The cool night air breezed in. Shadows moved on the lawn. 3 men dressed in black tactical gear, moving silently toward the house. Cassidy slammed the terrace doors shut, and through the heavy brass latch. Crack! A bullet shattered the glass, whizzing past her ear. "Leo!" she screamed, running out of the library and toward the stairs. The glass behind her shattered completely as the men breached the room. Cassidy scrambled up the stairs, adrenaline numbing the pain in her shoulder. She reached the landing just as the assassins entered the hallway below. She needed a weapon. She had nothing. She burst into Leo's room. The boy was sitting up in bed, reading comics. He looked up, eyes wide. Under the bed. Leo. Now. Cass. "Do it!" she screamed, shoving him down. She grabbed a heavy bronze lamp from the bedside table and stood by the door, pressing her back against the wall. She could hear the heavy boots thudding up the stairs. They were coming. And this time, there was no Dominic to step in front of her. A figure appeared in the doorway, a man in a ski mask holding a suppressed pistol. Cassidy didn't wait. She swung the lamp with every ounce of strength she had left. Ideally, she would have hit his head. Instead, she hit his wrist. The gun clattered across the floor. The man grunted in pain and backhanded her. Cassidy flew backward, hitting the wall, her vision swimming. The assassin loomed over her, pulling a knife from his belt. "Stupid girl!" he growled. He raised the knife. Bang! The assassin's head snapped back. He crumpled to the floor, dead weight. Dominic Vanzetti stood in the doorway, his smoking gun in hand, his chest heaving. His eyes were terrifying. He stepped over the body and looked at Cassidy. She was bruised, bleeding from her lip, huddled on the floor. "Did they touch him?" Dominic roared, his voice shaking the walls. He's under the bed." Cassidy gasped. "He's safe." Dominic dropped to his knees in front of her. He didn't check on Leo first. He grabbed Cassidy's face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away a smear of blood on her cheek. "You foolish, brave woman," he whispered, his voice trembling with a raw intensity she had never heard before. "You ran toward them." "I heard the councilman," Cassidy stammered, the adrenaline crashing. "They disabled the alarms." Dominic's expression hardened into a mask of pure demonic rage. "Thorn." He looked up at Silas, who had just arrived, winded. "Secure the boy," Dominic commanded, standing up and pulling Cassidy with him, tucking her against his side like she was the most precious thing in the world. "And bring me the councilman. I want him alive. I want to take him apart, piece by piece." He looked down at Cassidy, and for the first time the ice in his eyes melted into fire. "You are not a prisoner anymore, Cassidy," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are the only person in this world I trust." The music had stopped. The gala was over-ending, not with applause, but with the screaming sirens of police cars that Dominic Vanzetti owned, and the silence of a house holding its breath. Cassidy sat in the kitchen, her expensive green dress ruined, the hem stained with dust and blood. Her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The house was swarming with Dominic's men, cleaners, security fixers. They moved like ants, erasing the violence, scrubbing the floors, replacing the glass. She wasn't shaking anymore. She had passed the point of fear and entered a strange, cold numbness. The kitchen door swung open. It wasn't Dominic. It was Silas. "The boss wants you," Silas said. His voice was less hostile than before. There was a grudging respect in his eyes now. He didn't look at her like a liability. He looked at her like a fellow soldier. "Is Leo asleep?" Cassidy asked, sliding off the stool. Sedated. He won't wake up until noon tomorrow. Come. Cassidy followed Silas down a hallway she hadn't seen before. They went past the wine cellar, down a flight of concrete stairs that dropped the temperature by 10 degrees. The air smelled of damp earth and iron. They entered a sound-proofed room. It was stark concrete walls, a single hanging bulb, and a metal chair bolted to the floor. Councilman Thorne was strapped to the chair. He looked nothing like the arrogant politician from the ballroom. His tuxedo was ripped, his face was a swollen mask of purple and red, and he was weeping silently. Dominic stood in the corner, his jacket off his white dress shirt, rolled up to the elbows. His hands were clean, but there was a towel on the table that wasn't. Cassidy, Dominic said. He didn't turn around. He was staring at Thorne with the intensity of a scientist examining a bacteria sample. I told you to go to bed. You told Silas to fetch me, she corrected. Dominic turned, then surprised. He looked at Silas. She needed to see, Silas said simply. If she stays, she needs to know the cost. Dominic's jaw tightened. He looked at Cassidy, his eyes searching hers for revulsion. You should not be here. This is not for your eyes. He sold Leo, Cassidy said, her voice steady. She looked at the councilman. He told them where to find a child. For money. For debt. Thorne blubbered, spitting blood. I have gambling debts. The Morettis. They said they would kill my wife. I didn't have a choice. We always have a choice, Arthur, Dominic said softly. He walked over to the councilman. You could have come to me. I would have paid your debts. I would have owned you. Yes, but your family would be safe. Instead, you betrayed me. Dominic picked up a heavy steel wrench from the table. Cassidy flinched. She wanted to look away. Every instinct in her civilized brain screamed at her to run, to call the police, to flee this dungeon. But she stayed. She remembered the fear in Leo's eyes under the bed. She remembered the bullet hole in the diner window. What happens now? Cassidy asked. Dominic looked at her. Now I send a message. The Morettis think I am weak because I am a widower. They think I am soft because I have not expanded my territory in 2 years. Tonight I remind them why they used to fear the name Vanzetti. He handed the wrench to Silas. Finish it, Dominic said. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Dump him in the Moretti district. Thorne screamed as Silas stepped forward. Dominic grabbed Cassidy's arm and pulled her out of the room, slamming the heavy steel door shut, cutting off the sound of the councilman's pleading. In the hallway, Dominic pressed Cassidy against the wall. The proximity was overwhelming. He radiated heat and violence, a volatile mix that made Cassidy's breath hitch. You think I'm a monster? He whispered, his forehead resting against hers. Go on, say it. You are a monster, Cassidy whispered back. She didn't pull away. She reached up her hand, trembling, and touched the side of his face. But you're the monster that stands between Leo and the wolves. Dominic froze. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, as if he were starving for it. For a moment, the Mafia boss vanished, replaced by a man carrying the weight of the world. I cannot let you go, Cassidy. He murmured, his lips brushing her ear. Not now. You know too much. You have seen too much. You are in the bloodline now. I know, she said. If you stay. Dominic pulled back, looking her in the eye. There is no going back to the diner. There is no going back to being invisible. You will be a target. You will be judged. You will be hated. I was already invisible, Dominic. I was a waitress nobody looked at twice. She straightened her spine despite the exhaustion. If I'm going to be a target, I want to be a moving one. I want to learn. Learn how to survive in your world. I don't want to hide under beds anymore. Dominic studied her face, looking for hesitation. He found none. A dark satisfaction settled in his eyes. Very well, he said. Tomorrow your training begins. Go to sleep, Cassidy. You're going to need it. He kissed her forehead, a chaste, burning seal of a pact, and walked back into the interrogation room. 4 weeks later, Cassidy Rourke sat in the passenger seat of a Maserati checking the magazine of a Glock 19. Keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready to destroy what is in front of you, Silas said from the driver's seat. I know, Silas. You've told me 1,000 times. Cassidy slotted the magazine home with a satisfying click and holstered the weapon beneath her blazer. She looked different. The dark circles under her eyes were gone, replaced by a sharp, alert gaze. Her hair was cut into a sleek, shoulder-length bob that made her look professional and severe. She wore a tailored navy suit that screamed money and power. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was Dominic Vanzetti's personal associate. The rumors in the city were wild. Some said she was his mistress. Others said she was a secret assassin he imported from Europe. Cassidy didn't care about the rumors. She cared that she could now strip a handgun in under 30 seconds and spot a tail into traffic. We are meeting Luca Moretti at the rail yard, Silas reminded her as they turned off the highway. Neutral ground, but with Luca nothing is neutral. Why am I coming? Cassidy asked. Dominic usually handles sit-downs alone. Because Luca asked for you, Silas said grimly. He wants to see the waitress who killed his best hitman with a lamp. Cassidy swallowed hard. The memory of that night still woke her up in a cold sweat, but she pushed the fear down. Dominic needed her. They pulled into the abandoned rail yard. Rain was falling, turning the gravel into grey sludge. 3 black SUVs were already parked in a semicircle. Dominic was standing in the center, flanked by 4 guards. He looked imperious, holding a black umbrella waiting. Silas parked, and Cassidy got out. She walked to Dominic's side. Dominic glanced at her. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened at the corners. Stay close. Do not speak unless spoken to. Watch his hands. I got your back, she whispered. A limousine door opened across the lot. Luca Moretti stepped out. He was younger than Dominic, perhaps in his late 20s, flashy and arrogant. He wore a white coat that was already getting splattered with mud. He had a smile that reminded Cassidy of a shark. Dominic. Luca spread his arms wide. So good of you to come out in this weather. Cut the theatrics, Luca, Dominic said, his voice cutting through the rain. You called the meet. You want to negotiate a truce. A truce, perhaps? Luca's eyes slid to Cassidy. He licked his lips. And this must be the famous Cassidy, the Joan of Arc of Philadelphia. Cassidy held his gaze. Mr. Moretti. Charmed. Luca stepped closer, ignoring the guards who tensed up. Dominic, I'll be honest. The war is bad for business. My shipments are getting stopped. Your unions are striking. We are bleeding money. You started this when you targeted my son. Dominic said, his voice dropping to a growl. A mistake. Luca waved his hand dismissively. Subcontractors. Unreliable. I dealt with them. Cassidy narrowed her eyes. She watched Luca closely. He was twitchy. His eyes kept darting to the shipping container to their left. It was a subtle movement, barely a flick of the iris, but she saw it. She scanned the container. It was rusted, seemingly empty. But there was a fresh scratch on the metal door handle. He's lying, Cassidy whispered, barely moving her lips. Dominic didn't react visibly. So what is your proposal, Luca? We split the waterfront, Luca said, reaching into his coat. 50-50. I stop the attacks, you open the docks to my imports. He's stalling, Cassidy hissed again. The container on the left, 9 o'clock. Dominic shifted his weight. That sounds reasonable, Luca, but I have a counter-offer. Oh. Luca smiled. And what is that? You leave my city, tonight, or I burn you to the ground. Luca's smile vanished. That is not a negotiation, Vanzetti. That is a threat. It is a promise, Luca sighed. A shame. I really hoped we could do this civilly. He raised his hand to scratch his nose, a signal. Down! Cassidy screamed. She didn't wait for Dominic to move. She tackled him, driving her shoulder into his chest, knocking him into the mud just as the shipping container doors flew open. Automatic gunfire erupted. Bullets chewed up the ground where Dominic had been standing a split second ago. Cover fire! Silas roared, pulling a submachine gun from under his coat and spraying the container. Dominic rolled, covering Cassidy with his body, shielding her from the debris. He pulled his own weapon and fired 2 precise shots. One of the gunmen in the container fell. Get to the car! Dominic yelled, hauling Cassidy up. It was chaos. The Moretti men were advancing. Luca was running back to his limo, laughing. Cassidy scrambled toward the Maserati, but a gunman emerged from behind a pile of ties blocking her path. He raised his rifle. She didn't think about the training. She didn't think about the morality. She drew her Glock, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger twice. 2 shots to the chest. The man dropped. She stared at him for a fraction of a second, horror warring with relief, before Dominic grabbed her jacket and threw her into the car. Silas slammed the gas in reverse, spinning the car around as bullets shattered the rear windshield. They peeled out of the rail yard, sliding on the mud, the roar of engines drowning out the gunfire. They drove in silence for 5 minutes, putting distance between them and the ambush. Dominic was breathing hard. He checked Cassidy over his hands, running over her arms, her face checking for blood. I'm okay, she gasped. I'm okay. Dominic slumped back in the seat. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and awe. You saw the container, he said. He kept looking at it, Cassidy said, her hands starting to shake as the adrenaline faded. He was stalling. Dominic laughed. It was a dry, dark sound. I brought 5 of my best men. Veterans, killers, and the waitress is the one who saved my life. He reached out and took her hand, interlacing their fingers. His grip was tight, painful. We are at war now, Cassidy, Dominic said. Total war. Luca broke the rules of the sit-down. There is no going back. Good, Cassidy said, surprising herself. She looked down at her hand in his. I'm tired of running. Dominic pulled her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Then we stop running. Tonight we hunt. But as they sped back to the fortress, Cassidy caught Silas looking at her in the rearview mirror. His expression wasn't one of pride anymore. It was worry. Because Silas knew what happened to women who fell in love with Vanzetti men. They either became queens or they became casualties. And he wasn't sure which one Cassidy was destined to be. The war did not happen in the streets. It happened in the terrifying silence between heartbeats. It was Tuesday evening when Dominic emerged from his office, dressed in a black suit that looked disturbingly like mourning attire. It ends tonight, he told Cassidy in the foyer, checking the load on his sidearm. We have located Luca. He is hiding in the penthouse of the Sapphire Hotel. He thinks he is safe. I'm coming with you, Cassidy said, reaching for her jacket. No, Dominic's voice was final. He stepped close, cupping her face with hands that were usually so cold, but now burned with intensity. This will be messy, Cassidy. Close quarters. I cannot risk you. You are my only weakness. He kissed her hard, a kiss that tasted of goodbyes and gunpowder. Stay with Leo. Keep him safe. Dominic left with 20 of his best enforcers. The convoy of SUVs disappeared into the rain-slicked night, leaving the estate eerily quiet. An hour passed, then 2. The silence in the mansion grew heavy, suffocating. Instinct honed by months of looking over her shoulder gnawed at Cassidy. She decided to check on Leo. She walked up the grand staircase, nodding to the lone guard in the hall. When she pushed open the door to Leo's room, she froze. Dr. Aris, the nervous little man who had treated her shoulder wound, was standing over Leo's sleeping form. He held a syringe filled with a murky yellow liquid. "Dr. Aris," Cassidy asked, her voice sharp. "What are you doing?" The doctor jumped, nearly dropping the needle. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. "Miss Rourke, I was just administering a vitamin booster. Mr. Vanzetti wanted the boy's immune system strong." Cassidy frowned. Dominic hadn't mentioned vitamins. She looked at the doctor's shaking hands. "Put it down," she said calmly, her hand drifting to the Glock tucked in her waistband. "You don't understand," Aris stammered, tears welling in his eyes. "They have my wife. Luca, he sent me a video. He said if I didn't drug the boy, he would kill her." Cassidy drew her gun instantly. "Step away from him, now!" Aris dropped the syringe and collapsed into a chair, sobbing. He wanted the boy deep asleep so he wouldn't scream when they came. "When who came?" Cassidy demanded, stepping closer. "Dominic is hitting the hotel. Luca is trapped there." Aris looked up, his eyes wide with terror. "No. The sapphire is empty. It's a decoy. Dominic is digging through an empty room, while Luca is breaching this perimeter right now." The blood drained from Cassidy's face. The ambush at the rail yard hadn't been a failure. It was a setup to draw Dominic's security away from the house. "I'm sorry," Aris wept. Cassidy didn't have time for mercy. She pistol-whipped Dr. Aris, knocking him unconscious. She holstered her weapon and shook Leo awake. "Leo, get up. We have to move. Cass." The boy rubbed his eyes. "Where's Dad? He's not here." Cassidy whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Suddenly the estate plunged into darkness. The power had been cut. The emergency lights flickered on, casting the corridor in a blood-red glow. Outside, the thunder was replaced by the mechanical roar of an explosion at the front gates. Gunfire erupted downstairs, not the suppressed thwip of a hitman, but the chaotic, loud roar of an invasion force. "They're inside," Leo whispered, trembling. Cassidy grabbed his hand, pulling him into the hallway. She kicked off her heels, feeling the cold floor beneath her feet. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was the only thing standing between the heir to the Vanzetti Empire and a firing squad. "We aren't hiding under the bed this time, Leo," she said, her voice turning to steel. "To the roof. We fight." The hedge maze was a green tomb, suffocating and dark under the relentless rain. Cassidy shoved Leo toward the center statue. "Hide in the base," she hissed, gripping the stolen MP5. It was empty, a useless hunk of metal, but she wouldn't die on her knees. "Found you, little waitress," Luca Moretti purred, stepping out from the shadows. He didn't hesitate. He kicked her wounded leg, sending her sprawling into the mud. Cassidy screamed, scrambling back against the stone bench, glaring up at him. Luca leveled his pistol at her forehead, water dripping from his cruel smile. Dominic is buried under the Sapphire Hotel. And you're just a loose end. Go to hell, Cassidy spat. Ladies first. Luca's finger tightened on the trigger. Boom. It wasn't thunder. It was the roar of a high-caliber round tearing through the air. Luca's hand, the one holding the gun, vaporized in a mist of red. He shrieked, collapsing into the gravel, clutching the stump of his wrist. Cassidy looked up. Standing on the manor's balcony, illuminated by a flash of lightning, was Dominic Vanzetti. He was covered in concrete dust, his suit shredded, holding a smoking sniper rifle. He looked less like a man and more like the wrath of God. He vaulted the railing, sliding down the trellis and sprinting into the maze. He ignored the wailing Luca and fell to his knees beside Cassidy. "I'm here," he choked out, pulling her into his chest. "I dug myself out. I drove. God, I thought I was too late." "Leo," Cassidy gasped, pointing to the statue. "He's safe." Dominic's eyes closed briefly in prayer. Then they opened cold and dead as winter. He stood up and loomed over Luca. "Please," Luca sobbed, crawling backward. "It was business, Dom. Just business." "You hunted my son," Dominic said softly, drawing a desert eagle. "You hurt my wife." "Wife," Luca gasped. "The debt is paid." Bang. Luca Moretti fell silent forever. The bell above the door chimed softly. The diner was unrecognizable. The grease stains were gone, replaced by marble counters and plush leather booths. The sign out front read, "Cassidy's," written in elegant gold script. Cassidy Rourke stood behind the counter reviewing the ledger. She wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. She wore a tailored cream blouse and a diamond ring heavy enough to sink a ship. The back door opened and Dominic walked in. The room went quiet, respectful, not fearful. He walked straight to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Ready to go?" he asked, kissing her neck. "Just checking the payroll." She smiled, leaning into him. "Leave it for Silas. Leo is waiting in the car. He wants ice cream before we head to the lake house." Cassidy closed the book. A year ago, she was invisible, counting dimes to pay rent. She had thrown herself in front of a bullet for a stranger and woken up in a war zone. But looking at Dominic, the monster who burned the world down to keep her warm, she knew she'd do it all again. "Let's go home, Dominic." Hand in hand, the waitress and the boss walked out into the sunlight, untouchable. And that is the story of Cassidy Rourke. She started as a waitress, serving coffee to ghosts, and she ended as the queen of a criminal empire. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were no magic wands, only bullets, blood, and a love that survived the fire. Cassidy proved that sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back. Did you expect that ending? Or did you think Luca would win? Let me know in the comments below. Would you have pulled the trigger in the maze? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with a friend who loves a dark romance with a twist. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you're the first to know when our next story drops. Until next time, stay safe and watch who walks into your diner.